very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend Charles.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, but not just any fantasy today, because
Oh,
today we're talking about a big release, sending shockwaves through the world of fantasy and just fiction in general. You know, it's another one of these romantasy uh, juggernauts, if you will. And, you've read it, I have not, and also my voice, if listeners can't tell, is completely shot from a week of um, being at a convention for work and just talking in a loud conference room. So my voice is shot, but we will. The show must go on, Dylan. The show must go on, and for this exciting release, no less. So why don't you? Um, quit with the suspense and tell us what book you're here to talk about today already.
oh,
Jeez.
I'm sorry. I left you in such suspense, and I think the suspense is only enhanced by your new. You sound kind of like NPR level, like lower both in
Isn't
tone
it crazy how
and
much lower my voice is right now?
yeah, yeah. And you couldn't hit that high note in when you were trying to say, "Welcome to the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast." All these things
Welcome to.
that just aren't quite the same. But
I
you know
know.
what, Charles? We're here. We're ready to talk some fantasy. We're ready to even talk some romantasy because,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, you mentioned this is a juggernaut. This is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. This is a book that has accumulated 1,200,000 plus ratings
Wow.
on Goodreads, uh, adding up to a 4.61, Charles. I mean, this is a
Admiral,
book
that's like
with,
incredible.
yeah, incredible hype. It has captured the attention of the book talk crowd probably more than any other book. And I mean, book talk is that's what sells books now, basically. Like when you go to a
Yeah.
Barnes and Noble, they'll a lot of times you'll see they're just like a hashtag book talk section. And you are very likely to find Fourth Wing there. It is has been very interesting reading this. I read this with my partner because she's super into all the romanticy stuff, a big Court of Thorns and Roses fan, and she wrapped me up in this Fourth Wing craze. So I'm excited. I think I bring a little bit of a different perspective to it than most of the folks who are talking about this. Most of the folks talking about it are probably a little bit more along lines of the crowd that learned about it from book talk and is engrossed in that whole romantasy world. We dip our toes into romantasy a little bit here on the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast, but we are definitely more comfortable in the deep depths of the waters of grimdark and epic
hmm
fantasy
hmm
and that kind of stuff. So uh, this was uh, this was pretty much the only thing that I would say that we've read on here that's similar to this would be like a Court of Thorns and Roses.
Yes.
It should
We
be
read
interesting
the
to get into.
we read the first two books in that series.
Yeah,
Very popular episodes, you know, very popular genre right now. And I will say the Fourth Wing is like the
it's just
most
Fourth Wing, Charles.
what is it?
It's
What are you
not
talking?
the Fourth Wing.
Oh, it's just Fourth Wing. Oh, yeah, I thought you were asking me like a question. I was like, what? Yeah, so in Fourth Wing is the book in the past year that just random people that know me, coworkers and friends, have asked me about by a large margin. No one ever asks me, "Hey, have you read Lives of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch?" That's just internet people.
Except on Twitter.
Yeah, real life people never. But I've gotten asked multiple times, have you checked out Fourth Wing? What do you know about Fourth Wing? I'm just like, what is going on with this book? And I've been meaning to read it, but Dylan, you just couldn't wait and you had to go off and
Oh yeah, right.
and read it on your
You're
own.
seriously gonna play that after I pitched it to you and friends pitching fantasy, and you
Hey, but you
unceremoniously
also pitched
dumped
Powder
it?
Mage, and that's what the fans voted on, and is it is what it is. So, um, yeah. So I'm curious to hear about it though, because I'll be honest with you, I enjoyed Court of Thorns and Roses, but I don't think romantasy is my genre. So I'm curious to
Yeah.
hear from you, like how it compares and what you thought about it, because we haven't talked about it at all. We've been saving it for the episode.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, anytime you're going into a book with this much hype, there's going to be at least on my end a little bit of wariness. But I tried to go in based on some of what I've heard, thinking like, hey, this is best viewed as just entertainment, and just try to enjoy it because it's something that gets weirdly when it has such high ratings on Goodreads. If you go to like the R fantasy subreddit where
Mhm.
uh I mean, not to attack our fantasy, they read a lot of the same stuff as us and love many of the same books. They align much more with our taste generally than this like Fourth Wing and some of the other romancy stuff generally does. But I
Mhm.
find they can be just a wee bit snobbish about
Ooh.
like if you bring up a Court of Thorns and Roses or Fourth Wing on there, like uh, there'll be a bunch of people telling you like I don't understand the craze around it, like the world building is not thorough enough, and the like those are the kind of critiques. And then you've got the other side of the spectrum, which is on Book Talk, just people screeching, just screeching, and barely audible in that is the words fourth and wing, and that's the review.
Right?
Obviously, I am stereotyping unfairly both crowds there, like all of it's more nuanced, but that is the caricature of both ends of that spectrum. So I'll say I went in thinking like, okay, like I have a little bit of a sense based on Core Thorns and Roses, and I am ready just like be entertained and not overthink all of it. And with that attitude, I did end up enjoying it.
Mm.
I do have I end up giving it 4 stars on Goodreads. So,
Mm.
and I feel that's a pretty true 4 stars for me, where I'm like, I enjoyed this. I was uh, like looking forward to reading it, entertained by it. Uh, but I have some things about it that also kind of made me cringe a little bit. Some parts of it that I was like, I don't know if this is for me. And I can tell
Mm.
I might
Mm.
not be the target
Mm.
demographic or just the target audience for some of these things.
Mhm.
But overall, I think it's enjoyable. And for folks who are going in to this with the perspective of like, it's just popcorn romantasy fiction, sit back and enjoy, and easy reading, even though they're relatively long.
Mhm.
It goes by quick and it can be fun. And if you're
Mm.
ready for that, this can be a great fit, especially if you like some steamy romance.
Ooh, yeah. I mean, that's good to hear. That's kind of where I was expecting you to land on this. It seems like, you know, you have to respect the readability of it. That's what that genre is so good about. It's just
Yeah.
like entertaining, and it's kind of unfair to call it easy. It's kind of just like you hit a rhythm with it and you're like in a trance with it and you just are enjoying the experience and it doesn't slog down. So like that is a very difficult thing to do as a fantasy author, especially when you're dealing with all these fantastical elements and worlds and things. So that's impressive in its own right. And I think we just have to recognize, like, I get that, like, it's its own genre, right? It's not for everybody, but this is the world we're living in, Dylan. Like Taylor Swift is like a the hottest musician,
Why you bring
Barbie's
Taylor
top of the
Swift into
box
this?
office, and you
What
know,
does that?
like Fourth Wing and Court of Thorns and Roses are topping the charts. It's just the world that we live in, and I'm
What does
all
Taylor Swift have to do with it?
because there's like this huge, girl power demographic right now, and then they're
I
like,
like Taylor Swift. How dare you?
yeah,
How
I mean,
dare
they're cross.
you minimize my experience as a Swiftie?
No one's minimizing anything. It's a crossover hit, you know. But that's what I'm saying. It's like this Barbie's a crossover hit too. You don't get to be make $1 billion in the box office in this day and age without being a crossover hit. But it's just a new. I don't know. I say new, but it's a big trend in the past couple years. And it's would you say that a lot of it was more typically like because a lot of people that have brought it to me that mentioned Fourth Wing were female. So I imagine that this book, kind of similar to The Court of Thorns and Roses, was more of that female perspective. Am I right on that? I don't even know who the main characters are
I
in
mean
this
the
book.
demographics of romantasy readers, you have to think is leaning way more toward women than men, but folks of all genders can enjoy Taylor Swift and romantasy, Charles.
Hmm. I
And
never
I,
said they couldn't.
I
I
heard you
did read
explicitly
Court of Thorns and
say that.
Roses and the second book, Wings of
Yes,
Wealth and Ruin.
right.
Um,
Yes. Let's no, Charles, I get where you're coming from, and I think uh, you can tell that above and beyond all other demographics, Rebecca Yarros is trying to appeal to straight women in particular, although folks of all genders can enjoy. But in terms of like who's going to be most likely to be completely enraptured in the romance elements of this romantasy, it's folks who identify in a similar way to the main character and have a similar sexual orientation and are interested in folks of the same gender of the love interest, right? I mean,
Hmm.
and that doesn't stop like someone like me from enjoying the books, but uh, I mean, Rebecca Yarros, she really knows what she's doing, and also it should be said that the stats show that women are uh, like read much more frequently on average than men do, and this genre, like when you think about like what you were just getting at, uh, like the most popular fantasy books by far these days, like let's take like Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings out of the equation just a little bit because those are from a long time ago now,
Yeah,
one
they're
more
always
than the other,
popular.
but like they're kind of like uh, almost classics at this point, especially Lord of the Rings. uh, in terms of modern fantasy, like books being published now, the biggest books are by far in the romantasy genre.
Oh yeah.
And it can be weird for us where we're like uh kind of in our own specific uh like communities that generally read more of like epic fantasy, grimdark, and so on. But it's yeah, it's different, and it's a different world out there. And I'll say too, Rebecca Yarros, something that's very interesting when you think about the success, the massive success of this book,
Hmm.
is I was watching an interview with her, and she said that when her publisher decided that they were going to have like a romantasy line, what she did, Charles, I think you'll be interested in this as a person in marketing.
Okay.
The She basically sent in five proposals for five different ideas of what kind of romantasy novel she could write,
Hmm.
and then had the publishers read through it, and they basically told her, we're going with pitch number three, we're going to do the dragons. And she was like, okay. And so presumably she had like pitch number one, maybe it was vampires or whatever. I don't know the details of what the other ones were. Two, maybe it was fairies, which are super popular, like in Court of Thorns and Roses. Four, who knows? Maybe it was mermaids. I don't know. But the point
Hey,
is,
that would be a bad
she,
idea.
right? It kind of flies in the face of these ideas that you'll typically hear on like when it comes to writing advice and stuff like this. Like, don't chase what you think is going to sell. Like, in fact, if you try to do that, like you'll never be able to be on top of the trend and it won't even work. So just write the book that's in your heart. And I think that's good advice just for the sake of like, yeah, write the book you want to write. Like,
Mm,
enjoy it and tell the story that is in your heart.
mm.
But when it comes to, moving paper, like Rebecca Yarros was like, hey, like I can get enthusiastic about writing any of these. And then she was like, it's your job to sell the books.
Yeah.
Tell me what you as experts think will sell lots of books. And
Oh yeah.
she said they looked where there was a hole in the like market, and they were like, I think we can do dragons. And I
That's
think
so
the numbers
true.
speak for
The market
themselves.
the market research prevailed, but it's not just dragons, Dylan. It's a dragon school. Okay,
Yes.
those are two very because the school of magic is also a very popular genre. And when you look at the other titan in the industry, Court of Thorns and Roses, it's not a school and there's no dragons. So it is a welcomed all ships rise with the tide kind of situation because both of those things were a big deal with people like getting the elevator pitch of the book. It's like, oh, it's romantasy with with dragons in a school. It's like, okay, that
Right.
sounds like $1 billion. That sounds like $1 million idea to me. I don't know about you.
It sounded that way to her publishers as well. So let me
Oh
read
yeah.
the premise here, which probably would have been good to get into earlier. Thank you
Yeah,
for
I would think we should talk
prompting
about the
that.
book itself at some
Yeah,
point.
should we talk about the book itself? So I'm going to read from the flap here. It's not on the back of the book, but it is on the flap. So enter the brutal and elite world of a war college for dragon riders from New York Times bestselling author Rebecca Yarros, who I should mention wrote romance before this. Like that's where uh,
Mm.
she wrote just like romance, typical romance genre stuff, and then was like, oh, I could write romantasy. And here we go. 20-year-old Violet Sorengale was supposed to enter the scribe quadrant, living a quiet life among books and history.
Mm.
Now, the commanding general, also known as her toughest talons, Charles, mother, has ordered Violet to join the hundreds of candidates striving to become the elite of Navarre, dragon riders. But when you're smaller than everyone else and your body is brittle, death is only a heartbeat away because dragons don't bond to quote unquote fragile humans. They incinerate them, Charles. With
Mm.
fewer dragons willing to bond than cadets, most would kill Violet to better their own chances of success. The rest would kill
Mhm.
her just for being her mother's daughter, like Zayden Rorson, the most powerful and ruthless wing leader in the Riders Quadrant. She'll need every edge her wits can give her just to see the next sunrise. Yet, with every day that passes, the war outside grows more deadly. The kingdom's protective wards are failing, and the death toll continues to rise. Even worse, Violet begins to suspect leadership is hiding a terrible secret. Friends, enemies, lovers. Everyone at
Mm.
Basquiat War College has an agenda because once you enter, there are only two ways out: graduate or die, which is the same as a PhD program as well, in my experience as a
Yeah.
PhD student.
Golly.
We
Wow.
don't know which one will come first at this rate, but
Yeah.
one will happen or both.
Uh,
Yeah.
wow,
So
we
that's
okay.
the premise. Yeah,
I
and all.
see. So that's a lot to unpack. There's a lot going on there. Um, Certainly I can see why it's a success and how it has a lot going for it. The one question that I have, and that's been burning at me ever since I read about this book, is how do the dragons play into the romance. It's because you hear that they have to bond to a human, and I'm like, oh, is this like a human dragon love
No, no.
connection going on here, or is this like a
The humans and dragons don't get involved like that.
hmm,
But
I see.
there is a way in which the dragons do figure into the equation in terms of the
Mm.
romance element of it, but it is not it's not by having
What
sex
does
with
that mean?
mice.
How do they play
So,
into the romance?
I mean, I don't want to say it because it's a spoiler,
Mm,
really, but
okay. Man, I mean,
yeah,
that's how you
I
move those
can't really.
books, you know? It's like I gotta find out how the dragons get involved in all of
Yeah.
this, you know?
So, all right, Charles, was that that's your main question? I have a lot of thoughts I do want to share here.
That
So,
was the main question. I'm
feel
not
free. That was your
satisfied at
main.
all. I still have lots of
Read the
questions,
book,
but for the sake of
Raphael, as the kids say.
spoilers, yeah, it's
I'll tell
fair
you
to
off air.
say, yeah. So, okay, that's fair. Um, so I guess yeah, then just tell us about the rest of the book then.
Yeah, I'll tell you about
What
all the
else is
parts you
going
don't care
on?
about because all you cared about was whether or not the dragons are having sex with the people.
I
Uh,
mean, who wouldn't be with a plot back of the book synopsis like that?
yeah, I mean, well, uh, it's definitely a uh, it's definitely an interesting way that they play in, but yeah,
Mm,
I'll tell you off there. But they
okay.
do have a role for sure, and it's an interesting use by Rebecca Yarros of like certain romanticy tropes and kind of working the dragons into it. But anyway, the things that I want. Well, first thing I want to start with, Charles, around this is the voice used by like not even necessarily Rebecca Yarros's voice so much as the voice of the characters themselves and how they speak to each other. Like you remember where we we talked about the Poppy War kind of having a modern
Mm,
voice to it, and we
mhm.
also like this takes it to a whole different level. So we're like in a medieval technology level world with dragons and all that kind of stuff. But Charles, these people are just going around like using straight up modern day like slang, like especially like the kind of slang that you'd see on something like TikTok or whatever. Like if you go into like the comments on TikTok and it's like you'd see folks writing and presumably talking in their day to day life in this way. It's
They're going
like
like Yas Queen,
uh,
Slay, all that
it's like a
stuff.
slight step back from that, but I did
Oh,
grab
okay.
some example. Well,
Oh,
it's like so say things like we're a hot freaking mess or you are
oh,
not attracted to toxic men, I remind myself, and yet here I
mm,
am getting all attracted, or like I
hmm
am a
hmm
certified badass, or not that I wouldn't climb the man like a tree if presented with the right set of circumstances. Like that's I've literally seen like,
Okay,
oh, I'd climb
okay.
that man like a tree. Like I've seen that written online before. It's like the phrasing. It's very interesting when you kind of put like this is part of why I like reading a little bit outside of the realm of what we typically read because you get an
hmm
idea like there's a spectrum, Charles,
hmm
ranging from like something like Tolkien, which that was a whole different like time in
Yeah.
terms of writing in general, but like
Mm.
this very like high fantasy way that the characters will speak to each other. And then
Yes,
you
proper
even
and
get like,
noble and
yeah,
foreign, yeah, like this otherworldly. Yeah.
right. And then you even move towards something like Game of Thrones, which is maybe slightly more modern, but you still have the characters talking to each other in a way that like feels medieval in the way that they're speaking. Like they'll be like, you know, even just I remember at one point Maester Pycelle was just like talking to Ned. He's like, "This is a ponderous tome," and I'm like, "No." human would say that outside like uh, he's trying to say it's like a slow moving book, but he's like, this is a ponderous tome, or all the like, here's Lord Eddard of Winterfell, like of the Stark family, who like, it's like all that kind of
From
way of
chaos is a
speaking.
ladder to I'd climb that man like a ladder.
Right. Exactly. That is where it goes. But then you even have like a step toward the more modern would be Sanderson. Like Sanderson would never write something that is like modern day slang, but he keeps
Right.
things a little bit more like modern
Colloquial.
feeling in the way the characters interact with each other. Like they use kind of more standard words and less medieval feeling stuff, even if that's kind of the era of technology. And then, yeah, like Poppy War is another step toward this. And this is just like pure, like, oh, who cares? Like, I'm just trying to appeal to the book talk crowd. And
Mhm.
this is how they speak. So they'll be like, oh, Violet's one of us. And
Yeah, yeah.
then they're going to enjoy it. So those are, it's just interesting. Like, these are things that I feel like George R. R. Martin would shudder at. But meanwhile, I'm sure they outsold his books this year.
Oh yeah, you think, but hey, it's what the market wants, I mean, you got to respect that, and it sounds like she pulled it off pretty well. And at some point, you have to ask yourself when you're in this genre for so long, it's like, why must we feel compelled to have our characters sound like over literary and epic all the time? Like, why can't we breathe some fresh modern light into some of the voices of
Yeah.
these characters, I'm all for it. It's just a different way of approaching the genre and the tools in the fantasy arsenal to create a story for a new audience, basically, and bringing more people who aren't fantasy readers into the fantasy genre. My coworkers and friends, like IRL, that have never read Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss are reading this. So hey, maybe at some point we can get them over to over there. Who knows? But at least they're in the genre, and then dragons are cool still, you can't deny that.
Yeah, I mean, there is an extent to which I think this is appealing so broadly to folks who don't like a lot of whom don't even read, generally speaking, at all.
Mhm.
Maybe we'll read
That's true.
like a fiction book like once a year or twice a year, and it's getting a lot of those people on board, and then it's also getting a lot of folks who wouldn't normally read the fantasy genre on board, which is great. It's awesome getting new readers, and we welcome them into whatever
Hmm.
fantasy related reading or beyond that they want to do. And at the same time, the reason that the hype for something like this can get up so high is in part some of the things that are like well established tropes that don't really move the needle for some folks who are well, who have read a lot in, be it romantasy or epic fantasy or what have you. So like for them it's old hand, but for folks who hardly read fiction at all, they're like, whoa, like this is out of control. Like we have I mean, even just the idea of things like bonding to a dragon and dragon riding. It's like,
Hmm.
Charles, you read what, Dragon Riders of Pern or what
Yep, and
have
I've
you,
seen
not that
Avatar.
long ago? It's like, and you've seen Avatar. So when you put those two things together, you really have the two main pillars of modern storytelling. So,
Mm.
right, Charles?
Well,
Wouldn't
and
you
and
say?
they say that Avatar would, well, and I mean like the James Cameron Avatar, not the
Right. Last
because
Airbender.
they fly on the are the are the
Yeah.
creatures the Na'vi, or are they the Na'vi? No,
The Navi are
the Na'vi
the
are the
blue
people,
people.
and then the creatures are like
I can't remember what they're called,
not
but that's
banshees.
too deep cut.
Avatar, flying creatures. Come on, Google. But yeah, it's just kind of the same thing where it's like, oh, you have to bond with the creature. Oh yeah, oh wait, Banshee. I think I was right.
There you go, Charles. That's
Hey, look at
deeper into
that.
the Avatar lore than I usually will delve into, but I respect you for going there. But I mean,
Thank
even
you.
so, this idea of a uh, like it's like a murder college is this
It's kind of
story.
crazy
It's
that
like
it condones murder.
yes, I mean, I don't think Rebecca Yarros condones murder, but the college does, and I think
Right.
it's
It's an
like
interesting.
yeah, there's certain rules around it, but it's supposed to be like, oh, we're making these people strong by pitting them against each other in certain ways, and they always be on guard, whatever. But even that is like the even something like Skyward by Brandon Sanderson has a lot of like, and that's got it's like young adults. It's a little bit younger. The characters involved for the most part, it's more like high school, and they're not like murdering each other, but they are in this like high stakes environment where they are very likely to die, and perhaps some get picked off along the way, you know,
Hmm.
and so it's like certain things I think about this book because it's appealing to such a broad audience. Like they're pretty well established things you'd find in a lot of books, or even like if you think of Hunger Games or something like that. It's the like it's pretty similar in terms of the uh, it's a bunch of people pit against each other who are going to die along the ways, and there's also these ideas of warfare and rebellion that are kind of in the background. And it's yeah, and it's also got then these elements of like I think a seasoned fantasy reader might kind of cringe at, but some other folks might not. Like, I'll give you an example here when it comes to
Okay.
world building, Charles. Um, so there's this part that is like hilarious, and it's in chapter two, where she's like trying to walk across some like narrow ledge thing as a part of getting enrolled in this
Mhm.
dragon rider murder college,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
she's like trying to calm her nerves, and she's just like, okay, like when I'm trying to calm my nerves, I always just think about facts, like to keep me grounded. And then she just starts going off on this, like, uh, it's over 2 pages. Like, there's a little bit of interruption in between, but it's over two
Wow.
pages of this, like, pretty large, like, you can look at it here,
Oh
Charles.
yeah.
When it
It's
goes,
no.
pretty sizable book here,
Yeah.
like
Hmm.
big hardcover, over 2 pages of her like reciting facts about the world. So let me read a little bit of it to you
So
here,
it's
Charles. So
like an
she's like,
exposition dump kind of, but it's
yeah,
a
but it's
tool. She's like,
so yeah, but dude, like at least usually the exposition dumps are a little bit more like, oh, like let me teach you this thing because you don't know about it. Like I'm a master
once
and you're
upon a time, a
like,
long
yeah,
time ago.
right. She literally is just trying to like keep her mind calm, and she's just like, this is what she starts thinking to herself. The continent is home to 2 kingdoms, and we've been at
Oh,
war
good
for
Lord.
400 years. I recite using the basic simple data that has been drilled into me for easy recall and preparation for scribes tests, blah, blah. Navarre is my home, is the larger kingdom with 6 unique
That's a fact.
provinces. Tirandor, our southernmost and largest province, shares its border with the province of Krovla within the Paromial Kingdom. And it goes on from there, Charles, where it's like, going into like this region is known for this kind of uh,
This
it's
is the
wheat that
desert
it
area. This
produces,
is the
and yeah,
water area.
exactly.
This is
Like
the
let me
mountain
I can
area.
right, let me grab a little bit more, but
That's pretty funny.
it's pretty bad. Like it's the equivalent of if I was like trying to focus for some reason while I was bouncing, and I was just like, the United States was established in 1776 with the Declaration of Independence. It
There's the
is home to
Northeast
50
region.
states. Yes, it's home to 50 states. I live in Colorado. That is in the Rocky Mountain region of the United States, known for its large mountains. And like, that is
Colorado
the
is my
equivalent of what
home.
she's thinking. Like, Dude, no one. Yeah, let me read a couple.
Yeah,
It's
when I
like,
feel like you have when it helps to think of facts, I'm thinking of literally like, textbook facts or like trivia or something. Not like
yeah,
this is where I live. That's a fact. Like,
right.
I'm this
Yeah, I
old.
think I'm this old. No,
I'm
but
I'm
it's
I'm
not
30
even,
I'm
she doesn't
32
even go
years
there because
old. I
it's,
live in Atlanta.
yeah. So here it's like within Navarre, Tirandor was the last of the bordering provinces to join the alliance and swear fealty to King Reginald. Like the kingdom of Paramiel mainly consists of arable plains and marshlands and is known for exceptional textiles, endless
Oh,
fields of
exceptional
grain.
textiles.
Yeah, endless fields
So
of grain and unique crystalline gems capable of amplifying minor magics. It's if I was like, Florida is known for its orange groves and it like widely imports those. It is bordered by the Atlantic Ocean. Like if I was trying
I'm
to play tennis and focus and I'm just thinking about how Florida is known for its orange groves. So it's like
So
those kind
Dylan, I
of
know it's a
things
little bit of a
where
spoiler, but did that end up working for her? Did she cross her little beam?
no, Charles, she died on page 28.
Oh man, that's sad. The
That's a
strategy didn't
joke.
even work.
Yeah. She died because she was too busy thinking about like random stuff that would not even come to anyone's mind when they're it's just a very weird thing, but it's like accomplishing the purpose of exposition dumping. But someone who's read a lot of fantasy is just like, oh, are you really gonna dump exposition on us for 2 pages in the most clumsy way possible? But it's
Hey,
it gets
better
the
that
job
than
done.
trying to sprinkle it out over 100 pages, I guess.
Is it?
Get it, rip the band-aid off.
Yeah, the band-aid got ripped off, and I mean,
Get
I
straight to
think you can't.
the dragon sex.
Yeah, I mean, so here's the kind of thing where for me, I was like rolling my eyes, and I was like, "This is silly," and I'm gonna tell Charles about this, but it's and apparently our listeners as well, but it's the kind of thing that if you are like deep in the trenches of what our fantasy is reading, I could see them reading it and just being like what? Like this is the book that got hyped up so much, and then
Mm,
folks who are a little bit more willing to go in with just the like I'm gonna enjoy this attitude and aren't like super experienced fantasy readers probably don't even think twice about that. Like they're probably like, oh, this
mm.
is what fantasy books do. Is like they have to get these out to you somehow. And lots of
Right,
books
right.
do
And it's like this
exposition
is
dumps,
part of the
but this was
experience.
clumsy.
It's like, oh, you're learning about the kingdoms
Yeah.
and the world and everything. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
You're
And there's an
right
extent
about
to
that.
which I'm like, us as people who've read a million fantasy books and about a million different provinces and a million different countries who have a
Right.
million different exports or whatever, it's like maybe I'm callous, but I'm like I don't really care. Like I don't care what the export is from this province. Uh, but I
Yeah,
remember when I was earlier in my days of fantasy reading, I was like more interested in the like details of something like Game of Thrones. I
right.
remember being
Mhm.
like super invested in all the minor details of every one of the seven kingdoms. So I mean, those kind of things they're minor, and for me, I just was able to go over them and then get to some of the more fun parts. But
Mhm.
they're funny to talk about.
That is funny. I hadn't seen that before. Like, there's always ways to get exposition across at the beginning, but that was pretty good. So this book is part of a series, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's the
Are the
first. The
other
second
books
is out.
okay?
Yeah, the
Got it.
others, I can't remember if it's like five eventually it's going to be or
So how does
something,
this
but
book fare on its own? Is it, with sequel potential kind of situation that we know and love, or what?
it tells a complete story, but it certainly leads into the sequel. I wouldn't quite call it standalone with sequel potential because I think if this was just a standalone, I'd be like, wait, like you do have to go into how you've set like what you've set up next, or it's not
Yeah,
going to
there's
feel
still a lot of
super
ground to
complete, but it
cover here.
does, yeah, but it doesn't like give you a cliffhanger that would be like, oh my god, like they didn't even complete the tale they were telling. Like she gets through what she needs to in this. I also haven't talked at all about the romance, really,
I was
Charles.
gonna say,
Maybe
literally,
it's
my
going to
next
show.
question queued up was like,
Yeah,
you have been avoiding talking about the romance.
I
Like,
have
let's
been
get into
avoiding.
it.
I've been protecting you, Charles, because I know
Mm,
you blush at the steamy romance. But
mm,
it's yeah, so for me, it did not hit extremely well, and I actually kind of found it cringy at times, the romance. So it was one of the things where I was like, I'm just feeling like I'm not the demographic for what's happening right now. And
I'm out of touch with society.
right, like something is missing in terms of like this is trying to do for me, but it's and I will say my partner who she's a big fan of the romance in A Court of Thorns and Roses. She felt
Mm,
like the romance wasn't as strong in this one, and
mm.
she so if that carries more weight than me just
But would
saying
you
like
say
I
like
don't know if
your
this
comparison, you kind of agree that the romance compared to Court of Thorns and Roses was a bit more outside your taste?
yeah, I would agree with that. Like I think that Sarah J Maas does a better job of writing the romance
Hmm.
of her series than does Rebecca Yarros. Not that it's bad, and it's kind of interesting because it's like I compare it to Sanderson, where it's like people who read this who really like world building, or they'll be like, "Wow, like I just read the Sanderson book, and like what bothers me about this Fourth Wing book is we didn't get." Any sort of depth into knowledge about what the different dragon, like there's different types of dragons, like what the different types of dragons are
Mm,
capable of, and what separates a blue dragon from a green dragon, and that didn't play as much of a role, and like, and then Sanderson is super like not strong at romance writing in my opinion, like so you see how like for Sanderson fleshing out all the world building and stuff is a priority, and then the some of the relationships, especially like romantic relationships, take a real back seat. Where like a
mm,
romance reader could read that and they'd be like, "Wait, what? Like these characters are just like
mm,
together now and they like each other?" Like, and here
mm,
it takes it takes front and center. So it does it does like have a bigger through line through the book than does any of the uh, like plot around the dragon or uh, the college equivalent that they're going to. Like the romance is front and center.
mm,
It showed a lot of like there's pretty clear parallels to I won't spoil anything in A Court of Thorns and Roses or in this, but there's those who have read A Court of Thorns and Roses at least through the first two books like we have, um, they would see very clear parallels to the two main like love interest characters in A Court of Thorns and Roses. Like there's people who are very similar in this book. And it does sort of have the feel of like Rebecca Yarros has probably read A Court of Thorns and Roses and probably like she seems pretty in tune with what people who read romantasy are like into in terms of love interests. So
Mm.
it
You
does
got your
kind of feel
bad
like she,
boys, your white knights, your all these,
yes,
yeah, okay.
perhaps exactly those.
I see. I see.
Right. Yeah. So for me, it was it felt like kind of a rehash of some of what we read in A Court of Thorns and Roses. And it was, for me, just like super telegraphed who, like, who the main love interest was. And I,
Mm.
I don't know. I just didn't find myself that invested in it. But meanwhile, like, I don't think she was writing that picturing me. Like, oh, like
No.
this, like, you don't think so either, Charles? She
No,
wasn't
I don't
like,
think
oh, this 31-year-old man from Long Island is gonna love this.
Well, yeah, I think there are plenty of people that do love that book but no, I am not surprised at all. It's the reason why I haven't picked it up. The only reason I've been tempted to pick it up, two reasons. One is it's obviously its popularity, and two is just enough people have come to me wanting to talk to me about it because they're like, "Oh, you're the
Yeah.
fantasy guy. You know this book, right?" And
You're
I'm like,
super into
and I'm
romanticism.
like, I
That's what the
know
people around
of
you
this
think,
book,
Charles. Yeah.
but I know enough about it to know that it's probably, just not my cup of tea. But I know who I would recommend it to. I did gift a copy to my partner as well, so because I'm like it's probably more in her demographic. So I did purchase a copy. Okay, so there's a copy in my home, but I have not read it.
Yeah. I mean, I'd love for us to read this on the show because I think there's a bunch of interesting conversations
Okay,
to have.
interesting.
Well, yeah, there's a bunch of things I've held back because I don't want to spoil anything. Like I feel like I'm tiptoeing around all sorts of stuff, and it would be really fun to get into. And I think that it's like when it comes to romance, it's like Charles, there's this nickname that the love interest uh, calls Violet, and to me, it's like every time I read it, I just cringe so hard.
Uh,
And
Fly Girl,
mm, you're
Gamer
not gonna guess
Girl.
it. Whatever you're gonna guess, Charles, it's to me cringier. But meanwhile, then I watched this interview from like Entertainment Weekly talking to Rebecca Yarros, and there's like all of them are like screaming, so excited. Like it literally starts with them being like, so the nickname is a play on uh the character's name, and they're like, "Did you name Violet that so that you could use this nickname from love interest that I won't name?" And they're like, she's like, "Yeah, that's why I named her that." And then they're all like, "Oh, I knew it!" Like,
Really?
yeah,
Wow,
like
she
they're so
named a
excited.
character around a
Yeah,
nickname?
yeah. And the
That's
nickname's
unique.
not,
I gotta hear
yeah,
this nickname.
yeah. I mean, so,
So it's off
and
of the
yeah,
word,
my
it's off of
partner found
Violet,
it
huh?
cringy too,
Hmm.
for what that's worth as well. Like it just was, but that's the thing is I don't know. She did something right that hit really well with so many people in terms of the romance. And even
Hmm.
though that wasn't my cup of tea, as you mentioned, Charles, like
Hmm.
I found a lot to enjoy in terms of the action, in terms of like characters getting picked off and killed, in terms of the like she actually can write a pretty entertaining fight scene, and like the ending is really climactic and exciting, and she knows how to pull on
Hmm.
your heartstrings. So
Hmm.
there's actually a lot that I enjoyed about it, and that is doesn't have much to do with the love story part of it, which I think is a big positive when you consider, okay, the like main thing that she was trying to do didn't really work for me, and I still enjoyed the book.
And that's an accomplishment for sure. And I'm really interested to see where like Rebecca Yarros, Sarah J. Maas, this whole genre and like continue to go. It sounds like they have a lot of ideas. Um, it seems to have some pretty solid staying power. Like it is a super popular genre. I mean, there's all kinds of content on TikTok dedicated to these stories, and it's good. I enjoy seeing it. It does make me want to pick it up and read it. Even though I know it's not necessarily like my taste. It's like you said, Dylan, there's something about it's like exercising a different part of your brain, getting to read kind of outside the core demo and being able to enjoy the experience anyway, like a proud grandparent sitting watching the kids dancing at a party. It's
Is
kind of
that
how
how
I
you see
feel. I'm like,
yourself, Charles?
I can enjoy this book sitting over here watching the dance party going on.
Yeah,
And I'll leave by 7 o'clock when they'll party till 1 a.m. But
you don't
I was
want to
just happy
know.
to be there. Yeah.
You don't want to know what people are getting up to after 7 o'clock in Fourth Wing, Charles.
Oh
You would
man.
blush.
Well, I'm trying to figure it out, man. Dragons are involved. That's all I know. And I'm trying to do the math
I
in my
know.
head.
Can't get into it because you have to read it so we can talk
This
about
must be some kind
spoilers.
of psychic bond that can enhance the pleasure or something. I don't know. Like, am I onto
Just
something?
let your imagination run wild there, Charles.
I don't know. I'll have to figure it out. One of these days, the secrets will be revealed to me, and I will know what everyone
For
else
sure.
knows about the romance in Fourth Wing. Um,
Yeah.
but awesome.
Overall, good
Overall,
book. I don't want to my uh, we've had our fun today
mhm,
with some of the jokes about the world building stuff like that, but I want people to like for me, I I would be willing to recommend this for sure once I have a sense of what someone's looking for in a book. Like I know that there's going to be people out there who are uh, oh, just not super interested in romantasy and who enjoy epic fantasy, grimdark, all that kind of stuff, but just like this isn't their cup of tea. Probably wouldn't be recommending to them, but if someone's open to just having an entertaining experience, sitting back and enjoying it, there's a lot to like about this book, and especially if you're into the romantasy genre, it's a fantastic fit. And as if anyone needs me to recommend Fourth Wing, but
yes,
uh,
the
you know,
international best-selling book is good. Is recommended.
yeah. Well,
Well,
we have a
that's
little bit
good
of
to
a
hear.
different audience
For
into
sure.
like it's suggested by the fact that we put Fourth Wing in a poll against books that have a fraction of the popularity based on
Mhm,
whatever metric you want to
mhm,
use into Goodreads ratings, number of books sold, all kind of stuff, and like
mhm,
that Powder Mage, which is a popular book in its own right, but
mhm.
compared to Fourth Wing, like
Right.
that can win out in a poll kind of goes to show that the folks who are listening and following our podcast are not primarily the romantasy crowd. So if you are in our listenership as someone who doesn't usually do it, like I think this and A Court of Thorns and Roses are both worth a try just to even see what's going on. And
Mhm.
if it's not for you, it's not for you. But and I think there is a lot to enjoy, though. It's just gotta look past the reciting of facts for 2 pages, uh, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, how many pages are the romance scenes?
Longer than 2 pages.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah,
All right. Well, yeah. Thanks for sharing and giving my voice a little bit of a rest. I appreciate that. Um, yeah, we got to talk about Fourth Wing. That's super exciting. And maybe one day we'll read it. Who knows?
maybe Charles. I love that completely non-committal
Oh, yeah. Well,
response regarding this
it's
book.
how could I
We
commit
should.
to that right now? It's not in our reading forecast for at least 2 months, So um we got to let that play out as it will. And we got to talk about it on the show, which is its own victory. And there's lots of other books out there. Lots of other books. So
Like
um
Malazan, Book of the Fallen. That's what you want to read, right,
that is
Charles?
another book that's out there.
Next friends pitching fantasy, Charles, is just going to be Malzahn, Book of the Fallen versus Fourth Wing versus what's another book
Are
you
we
wanted to
not
start to?
honoring our old rules of not repeating back to back a
Oh,
series?
okay. So the one
We used to
after
do
the next
that.
friends pitching fantasy, we did used to do that. Yeah, I think it's a good rule. So the Friends Pitching Fantasy after the next Friends Pitching Fantasy is going to be Fourth Wing versus Malzahn versus some other book you're super. Oh, versus the third A Court of Thorns and Roses book.
Okay. Do I have
The
the option
books that
to
you're
not show up that day for recording? Just no, I look,
irresistible.
I'd read any of those books. That's okay. Like I'm not against it. So we'll see. But yeah, exciting prospect. I'm looking forward to bringing those to Friends Pitching Fantasy. And yeah, the good news is like the books that we have coming up, one book apiece. We're reading Dune and we're reading
Mhm.
Legacy of the Bright Wash, and then it'll be right back into Friends Pitching Fantasy. So should be a relatively quick turnaround. And who knows what will be brought into the fold of the show. But a lot of exciting books still to come, and I'm looking forward to getting into them. But before we can do any of that, Dylan, I think we have to play that outro music. What do you say?
Let's get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping, Charles.
All right. Thank you, everyone, one and all, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. If you like what you heard today, if you want to support the show, do that over on the socials. That's at the FTF Podcast on Instagram and at the FTF Podcast with number 1 at the end on Twitter. And there's going to be some YouTube stuff, it's TikTok stuff. Eventually, the videos are made, they exist. We just gotta post them. So, at some point, that will be
Is that a
happening. I know
shot at someone here?
I'm not mentioning anybody. If someone were to feel personally attacked, then maybe they should unpack that at home on their own time. But for the, that's okay. It's fine. There's no rush. It's not a race. We've just mentioned it on like what 3 or 4 episodes now. So. Probably 4 episodes now. But it is coming, guys, we promise. But Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they want to support the show even more than over on the socials, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast, which you can do over on Spotify by clicking About and then clicking where the little rating thing is, and then you can give us 5 stars over there. You can also rate and review on Apple Podcasts. It's much more intuitive how to do it there, but that means you can write nice things about us. You can tell us all about how Charles should read all of the books that I've mentioned today, and how much he'd enjoy Fourth Wing, and that he seems like a really nice guy, and that you hope his voice heals up soon. But you don't have to do that, because just listening is more than enough. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, you don't have to do that. It would be appreciated, but it's totally not necessary, because just listening, as Dylan said, more than enough. So greatly appreciated. Thank you all for making it all the way to the end. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You guys are awesome. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.